So before handing it over to our conference speaker, Sivan Hirsch, allow me to introduce her very briefly. She is a prof at Faculty of Science of Education at Université Laval. She is interested in diversity issues in education and institutions of education in general. She speaks to sensitivity training at different levels and ethical questions, political questions, and pedagogical questions that touch on her research. And she has published a lot of research and a lot of guides intended to support the personnel, the teachers, in sensitive subjects like a guide on cultural appropriation in arts and teaching diversity, ethnocultural diversity in the classroom, and a guide to support teachers on genocide. Sivan had not put this in her bio, but she does workshops with different faculties and different colleges, so you can contact her if you are interested in what she's offering. So I will now hand it over to Madame Hirsch, Sivan Hirsch, and have a happy webinar. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for the invitation. And that will allow me to explore these ideas with you today. I will begin by sharing my screen. And I will now share with you, not full screen, but just to allow you to share the relevant documents that we can see the relevant documents. And I would like to also begin by saying, in addition to what Nicole was saying, that the beginning of the presentation and throughout, don't hesitate to share your comments, ideas, subjects, things you had trouble with in the classroom, sensitive subjects. You can ask your questions and put your comments in the appropriate space, and we'll have time at the end to answer your questions as well. But if you have any questions that come up, please don't hesitate. And Nicole is there watching the chat, and she will be able to ask your question, and we can answer it directly, because sometimes if you wait till the end and it's something relevant to what we're talking about and it's something that's burning your lips, don't hesitate. So for today, we're going to discuss how we teach sensitive subjects and how we touch on sensitive subjects in the classroom. So it's a research project that I've done with teachers at universities, and so not necessarily at the CEGEP level, but you will see these are things that are very relevant for your context in the colleges and CEGEPs. So I started with this research project, which was shared practices. So I'm going to talk about that and what is the methodology we used. I'm going to share with you how we touch on sensitive subjects at university in the classroom. And I'm going to also talk about training and tools to develop critical thinking. But I'm going to begin by the definition of sensitive subjects in education and why I'm talking about it using these terms. So this is the definition that we will start with and that I will take questions on. So sensitive subjects, we have defined them with my colleague Sabrina Moisin with regards to research we've done with educational professionals at the high school level. We asked them, what are these sensitive subjects? What is sensitive? What makes something a sensitive subject in your classroom? And what they've said, we've collected all their answers. And what they said, what came out is sensitive subjects are subjects that are difficult to fully understand, that touch on social issues that are complex and multifaceted because they affect and they talk about how we live together in a society where there's not always a consensus, especially in the classroom, and they can question the status quo because of their controversial nature. It's a big, wide definition, and we will go through it together. But in reading this definition, we look at it, and you've already probably have some ideas on what is a sensitive subject for you in your classroom. So I invite you now to think about that and to try and deconstruct the definition and see what applies to you, and hope that it will help you to better understand what is sensitive in your classroom and how it relates to my definition. So if I talk about the different parts of this definition, when we talk about sensitive subject, it's a subject that's difficult to suss out, difficult to completely understand. Ideas that certain areas of knowledge are uncomfortable and we try to avoid them, that we would like to not know. That's the concept of difficult to know, difficult to learn. And it becomes a challenge for the teacher, because we will try to protect ourselves and raise our shields in hearing about these sensitive subjects. So these subjects touch on social issues and values, not just social representation and diversity with our students and with the parents as well. It's probably also true for the young students at Cégep and university, at the bachelor's level especially. But it's also our values and our social beliefs that are affected or touched on. So you can already see and think about the sensitive subjects for you. What are the values? What are the social issues that are concerned? When we say they're complex and multifaceted, we believe that we can't define this subject in 1 second. You have to take the time to look at the different aspects that concern this subject, to understand it. It takes time, but it also requires some expertise that we need to develop. Often we teachers are experts in 1 or 2 subjects, and we are interested particularly by certain subjects, but these sensitive issues force us to go outside of our comfort zone, outside of our discipline that we teach and we are comfortable with. So when we talk about how we live together in a society, in a context of an educational institution, we live in a democratic society. And in a democratic society, pluralism is by definition de facto. There isn't just one good answer to many questions. We're in a context of pluralism, and we have different ways of existing, of living in society that are all legitimate, and there's not necessarily a consensus. So that brings to question of a balance of power and power dynamics in classroom and society that we have in our classroom politics kind of thing. And we have a role that gives us a certain level of authority that allows us to subject the students to some of our choices. But sometimes these issues, these themes must come up in the classroom either from outside sources, or when we talk about these subjects and how the discussions will go, that's a challenge in and of itself. So often, spontaneously, we can choose to be surprised by what people bring up in the classroom, but it can really shake the status quo, the social conditions in the Cégep, in the classroom, and at large. So this is an analysis that is a bit more detailed. When you see examples, here are some examples that are relevant. It's been years that these are relevant subjects, hot subjects: the question of religion at school, the question of sexual violence, racism, systemic racism related to the Joyce Echaquan story, and that was the perfect example of this, and brought forward a lot of discussions in Quebec society and make these issues much more present. War in general, or the wars that we're seeing, the question of genocide, which is an question that I explore with my colleague Sabrina. We're going to talk about that. But I'm just going to give you a more recent example that is really relevant. So, where the Minister Derry came to a CEGEP to react to the teaching on the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I wanted to explore these sensitive subjects because they're really relevant, and it demonstrates very well the four elements that the four dimensions, the four pillars around sensitive subjects. Siviane, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second to say that people identify many subjects that are sensitive, and that sexual violence, immigration, racism, sexuality, representation, religion, DEI, the gender theory of evolution, consentment, the Crusades, First Nations issues, cultural identity issues, religion, and all kinds of issues. Yes, that's exactly right. And thank you, Nicole. And it's true that there's so many things that we can talk about and explore. And these are all sensitive questions for somebody. But it's not just these subjects, but what we want to do with them, how we want to explore them and discuss them. So that's why it's so important to be able to analyze them and not just say religion is a sensitive area. It's true. But why is religion a sensitive area? So that's the analysis we seek in doing a pedagogical analysis of sensitive subjects and proposing certain practices and that will turn this into an enriching experience in the classroom instead of an obstacle to learning. So I'm talking about the conflict in Palestine here, and it could be a subject of strong debates, and Palestine, Israel, Israel, Palestine. You can focus on whichever side you want, and what we're talking about here are values of social representation, self-determination, identity, nationalism, and questions of conflicting ideology, oppressive ideologies as well, and so oppressive ideologies and racist ideologies, because I copied that into my Genially. So this is the first part, is the ethical question, and then it touches on these subjects touch on different people in different ways, and different people will see it in a very different way. And I will tell you, of course, that I am Israeli, and my children, it touches us directly, whereas somebody else who is Palestinian or who is not affected directly by the conflict but is very interested in it, each one will have a different perspective, a different way of seeing, understanding, and living this conflict, even here in Quebec. So this diversity of views will be present in the classroom. And it's also a subject about power dynamics in Quebec society as well, even if the conflict is far away, exacerbated by an idea of a necessity of taking a position for or against. And that is something that is really strong in how we see things. You have to position yourself on one side or the other, and we forget that this engenders a power dynamic or a power relationship. And sometimes, well, it's totally normal when we talk about this kind of thing, but we should be able to take a step back and look at the situation and better understand the power dynamics. And the other part of it is a subject that is very complex, that necessitates a geographic, legal, geopolitical, psychological, economic, military. There's many facets to it. And we see that, and we did the exercise with a poli-sci colleague this winter. We tried some different exercises. We put the classes together to teach this subject because we really needed the different areas of expertise to be able to cover this question adequately with our students. All of that with with trying not to be biased and not to suppress any point of view with the pro-Palestinian demonstrations on campus and everywhere in Quebec and all the political tension that it creates. There's what we teach and what is in the classroom, but also what is happening in society at large. So I start with this example to say, and because you have this long list of subjects that are sensitive to you, and we see that these subjects will come up constantly. And in these projects that we've done, we worked on sensitive subjects at the high school level with my colleagues. And when the time comes, and the story of Duval at Université d'Ottawa, you probably remember that incident where she talked in a classroom, spoke about other subjects. She gave examples on queer community and black community and the terms they use that are intersectional to speak to each other. But she used these themes in the classroom. She talked about them in the classroom, which caused a lot of controversy, first of all, from her students, but also a reaction from society at large as to how we can talk about these subjects. So for us, having this opportunity to look at that, that would be very interesting to look at it in the context of sensitive subject, not only in high school, where often we see that students are subject to the authority of the teachers and we impose our view and context sometimes. But what happens in the university context where, well, we went to see university profs that are not of the same status of employment. They have much more latitude. So TAs like Duval are hired by the prof, so there's less job security. But in the case of a prof, they are supposed to be less worried about their job security and more free and more open to exploring things at the pedagogical level. So that's who we spoke to. And how did we do that? We invited them to share with us their practices. So we asked them to share with us some stories, some experiences, a situation they went through, and they talk about their ideas put into practice, and they share their reflective approach on this situation. So we asked them 3 questions. Tell us about a situation that touched on a sensitive subject. What have you learned from your experience? And what is the advice you would give to somebody else in the same situation? So what we get after our research, we got 26 shared experiences and shared practices, and you have access to all of that in this document that is accessible online for everybody. It's open, and you have all the shared experiences and shared practices that the participants accepted that we publish. And you can read through it and understand the context and the story we want to tell. And at the end of all of that, to give a piece of advice is, if I had to give a piece of advice, this is what I would say. So we have 26 of these examples and shared practices that we gathered, and when everybody participated and read what they wrote, some people said they were not comfortable in publishing them. So we ended up with 26, and there was 5 people that decided not to to have their words not published. So different universities, different teachers, different levels, from 3 to 30 years experience, and the teachers. The interviews, were 45 to 60 minutes, and we asked them 3 main questions. So here today I selected 8 shared experiences and practices. And what's interesting is that you can go see and read the ones that relate to your discipline or the subjects that interest you, and you can search through the document and find other points of view and other ways of seeing things, and some real nuggets of gold in there. So this is the link to the document. It's going to be in the slide deck that you will receive. So the research results that I'm going to share with you, just to show you how these sensitive subjects that I just analyzed in a technical way, the Israel-Palestine conflict and the situation in Gaza, and what makes it into a sensitive subject and what I've experienced with it. But you see that it works with different subjects. So what we do, those are the results. I'm just going to skip over that and go directly to the first level of analysis. So the different dimensions, the ethical dimension, social, pedagogical, and political. So the multi-level analysis on this conflict. And you will see how things evolve under different themes. So in the ethical dimension, the ethical part, we're going to talk about social representation in society, and why I teach this, why I include this in my course. And it allows us to think about, when we talk about representation in society, and we think that our classroom will share certain ideas and will agree with me, like male-female equality. We talk about that constantly as if it's obvious. But when we talk with our students, we're sometimes a bit troubled by some views that we don't necessarily share. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong or illegitimate. It's completely legitimate to have different views on things. So it brings us to think about our role and what we want to bring them to be able to do. We want to develop critical thinking in our students, but we also have a desire, I think all of us do, to share certain ideas and certain values at the college level, but I saw that at the university level. We come in with some ideas, and it takes a lot of effort on our end to accept that our ideas are not necessarily the ones we're going to share with our students, in theory anyway. So some examples. There's Christophe here, who teaches history, and he says, this experience taught me about the shame that I feel vis-a-vis certain parts of the history of First Nations in Quebec. I didn't feel comfortable teaching the content, but I had not always understood that the discomfort was due to some shame deep inside myself. So some teachers said that our students that bring some discomfort when they talk about these subjects, but it's often the teachers also that are uncomfortable, and not just the students. And so Cedric, who is teaching history as well, so sometimes the position we take as individuals and as teachers sometimes really affects us and touches us deep inside. And so Géraldine, it's interesting, but she's also a history teacher. I just noticed that they were all history teachers, but she talks about the whole question of feminism in the classroom, the gender roles historically of women. And she says that I want to understand what they mean and what they want to talk about, where they come from when they say that as soon as a woman in power has a bit of emotion, that she's hysterical. But it's not only about being moralistic, but it's also about power dynamics and how power is shared in politics. So the way she talks about that, she speaks directly to ethical issues and social representation. and the confrontation that it can bring forward with others and with some students as well. So she talks about this question of a plurality of opinions in society. So when I say plurality, I'm talking about different types of diversity. Yes, ethnocultural, religious diversity, that's the one we think of first. We talk about immigration from different countries, different languages and religions. But diversity is much more layered than that. There's also ideological, socioeconomic, political, gender, way of life, all kinds of diversity. So we don't hear about those as often in a classroom that can seem pretty homogeneous, but there's all kinds of different levels of diversity because we are in a democratic society and there's room for all of that. So the problem is not the fact that there's such a diversity, but the challenge of that is to be able to talk about it, to name the diversity, to recognize that it's there, and to be able to talk about it freely and openly, and make room for it. And if it's situated within that, and I talked about the conflict in Israel and Palestine, I'm Israeli. I can choose to not say that, but you would agree that if I talk about this conflict and I say that I'm Israeli, I'm not originally Israeli. I don't say that because sometimes it's better if they don't know. There's some research that says that the students in the classroom always try to identify what the teachers think, but they base themselves on preconceived ideas and notions of what the person looks like and what gender they are. She's an immigrant, she should think this. She's a woman, she thinks this about that subject. And so when they try to understand and ascribe some things to us, but I say that I'm Israeli, but that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily thinking in a certain way about this conflict specifically. And that doesn't also mean that I'm going to teach it in a certain way either. I hope for resolution and peace. I'm giving you some clues as to what I think here, but it doesn't mean that I give my opinion completely, but just to show that I'm not tabula rasa. I'm not a clean slate. I have some lived experiences, and I bring those to the table and share some of it in our conversations. So, two examples. We have Mathilde, who is a prof in education. I want to help people to think deeply, to be able to think outside the box, to leave their comfort zone, to look at different points of view opposite to theirs, so they can see things from the other side and walk in somebody else's shoes. All these sensitive subjects give us access to a reading of society. So Mathilde says, I will not only recognize this diversity, but I'm going to work to improve this diversity and make room for it in the classroom. Cedric says, I think that in disciplines like history, the students are not as often from immigration or not as diverse, whether they're visible minorities or not. Of course, that interests me. Of course, it doesn't really affect the immigrants. So he recognizes an absence of diversity, and that's interesting as well. When we're in a context where we teach and there's not much diversity in the classroom, not visible anyway, it's not as present in certain parts of society. And if we look at, for example, I don't know, a cégep in Saguenay, I don't know the cégeps, but somebody who teaches in the Saguenay and who is at Bécomo, for example, and will have a population that has some diversity. There are First Nations present, but it's not the same level of diversity that you will see in Montreal, of course, where we have a lot of different ethnic origins and immigration. But there's different kinds of diversity. In Montreal, you can learn about the presence of First Nations in Quebec, their history, and in Saguenay or Bécomo, you have to learn about the different cultures present in Quebec and the immigration to the province, and that now participate participate in the social fabric of Quebec society. So you see that diversity, it's not because it's not directly present, it doesn't mean that it does not concern us or affect us. So the political dimension is how to live together and power dynamics and the politics of power. So the example I give you here is Mathilde in education. She says, I want to make sure when I talk about certain subjects, I bring forward facts, sociological issues, and public debate, and not my own point of view. These are societal issues that are in our classroom, and we don't want to encourage one group versus another, but really a co-construction process that looks at balance of power, power dynamics, etc. So she's really at the heart of things here. Instead of just looking at it superficially, but she really talks about the power dynamics and the power politics and how to make people more comfortable in recognizing that. So the pedagogical part of it that reminds us that these are very complex intersectional subjects that cannot be looked at in a binary way, really, just not just for and against, but an interdisciplinary look at them, and the nature of knowledge, the epistemology of, and to develop some empathy to when we go back to the ethical part of it. So it's a kind of a circular kind of process where we look at the conflict in Israel-Palestine. So if I want to better understand the power dynamics between the Palestinians and the Israelis, of course, but also outside of those territories, people that are affected by this, I have to develop some empathy to both sides. But once again, we're looking at it in a binary way, but really we could look at it as being one side, and to talk about the different values and social representation. So it's very difficult. It's not easy. So you have two examples here. Eleonore, who is in linguistics and as a prof, and in fact, just a little anecdote to explain Eleanor's story. Eleanor talked about the usage of language, and she said that for me, I try to show my students that you can use words in different ways. But one day in the classroom, where she wanted to talk about an example of a word that is used in different ways and changes meaning depending on the concept. There's a student that gave an example, the Arab phone, and somebody said, oh yeah, it's a great example, I love it. And then, well, it's not a good example, it's very racist. The students react, and she was very troubled by that, by their reaction, and they were sensitive to that. But I wanted just to talk about how the language was used and what it means to different people. And so I was forced to change subjects because I didn't know how to start, and it was very complex on very different levels and different values for different people. So I felt like I was in a minefield and that I would hit something that would explode in my face. So I was paralyzed and I had to change course. So Géraldine, our historian, who we talked about her earlier, I don't know if I want to do this kind of activity again, because in relation to feminism and the place of women in history, because I feel that there exists a correct posture morally at the university level. I think that in certain situations we present things in a very binary way, whereas there are many gray areas, much more complex. So she said that there's just one answer in some cases, but how can I look at it in a non-binary way? It's very complex. So this is these are some examples of thorny questions related to sensitive subjects in the classroom. So this is where we have to take a critical distance and take a step back to consider certain things at a more higher level view. So, are there any questions or comments by our participants? Well, there are people who comment. I have a question to ask. Maybe we could wait till the end to see what you think, but it's more a general question. Thank you. Very interesting. So let us continue. So the second part, we want to talk about critical thinking and pedagogical ways of thinking about this to better work on this question. And to do that, why do I talk about critical thinking? When we develop critical thinking in our young people, we invite them to take a distance, to detach a little bit and take a step back. We have something we're looking at, and we take a step back to see it from a distance and not be as sensitive to certain things, and to take the time to better understand by doing that. So some people say we can take the sensitive subjects and propose that our students to analyze them so that they see what makes these sensitive subjects. So it's this detachment, this disinterested view that we have to take sometimes. So Geraldine said that in the last example. I see that what I bring to the table, and I feel uncomfortable because of certain views, and so to better understand how to manage that, sometimes it's true, it's not necessarily false beliefs, but we have to take our distances because there's many answers, and we have to look at it in a macro way. So different methods, criteria to encourage objective thinking and validate certain ideas and share certain ideas. So instead of trying to convince and propose a narrative or an argument and push that, I will try to better understand the different subjects and themes that are interplay. Playing. So for my students, come back to my teachers, I come back to Cédric. Groups are 95% women. So I take a position of defending women's rights. He's in primary education, so that explains the strong presence of women. So I take a posture of defending the rights of women, and I present the fact that women are underrepresented through history, and they are not represented correctly. So I try to bring some controversial questions to encourage discussion, but also we have to look at things in a very critical way, not just from where we start, but also to look at it in a pedagogical way. So in general, and these shared practices, the teacher tries to evoke or bring forward this critical thinking from the students, because there's a certain malaise, there's a certain discomfort with these students who try to think critically about certain sensitive subjects. So Eleanor says the same thing. I try to get them to take their distance sometimes and to look at things critically and help them to ask questions. I want to help them to identify problems and what's happening in class and connect that with the internships, what we teach in classrooms, and so in fact, it's really the different strategies that we want to bring up to get them to question what they hear. And it's sometimes difficult for us because if they're comfortable questioning us, we have to be ready to answer and to make the choices and criteria explicit, make it very clear what we have, considering what we want to explore together. So there's an anecdote that I share to illustrate this approach. In my classroom, I ask a question and somebody answers, and it's not well put together argument. I'll say, really? Why do you think that? And I said that often. Why do you think that? Why are you saying that? And I want them to debate and I want them to make their arguments clear and explicit and well thought out. And sometimes I ask a question and nobody answers. I say, come on, you can answer. Of course you have answers. And there's one person who puts their hand up very timidly and says, well, I'd like to give you an answer, but then you'll say, really? Why? Why do you think that? And if I can't answer, I will wait and I put together my thoughts. And so that's what that student said. So in doing that regularly, he has developed this way of debating with himself and clearing up his thoughts. So independently of what we're teaching, when you get them to have this critical thinking and to criticize their own thinking and to look at things by taking a step back and look at it more soberly and not as emotionally. So I'm just going to skip a few slides here, and I'd like to leave some time at the end. I want to get to, yes, and we have some questions also. So I will close with these examples. The example of the Palestine conflict in Israel and Palestine. So what we've done is we've identified this as a sensitive subject, and we tried, and because I'm Israeli, I was uncomfortable presenting this alone because I was afraid that some things would not be well perceived and not well understood by the class. So I found an ally that was a great choice in political science department, Francesco Cavatorta, who is a specialist on this question of Middle East wars and conflicts. It's the right choice person to work with. So we thought together about how we're going to cover this. We put together our plan and put our classrooms together this fall, and we started with 4 different aspects of the anti-racist education. We have to recognize racism as a social phenomenon, that racism is taught, where it is built, where it takes root, and to let the concerned parties express themselves, not just here in Quebec, but in Palestine and in Israel, that are going through this conflict. So to show things from different points of view, not just one and not just the mainstream view, and to understand things from different views and different perspectives, and choose the different themes we want to illustrate. So we did an activity in 4 parts. Francesco made a general presentation of the situation for 3 hours. They had a lot of reading material as well. The second class was what kind of dialogue is possible in such a conflict situation. How do we bring forward this question into open dialogue? And then we had a debrief with a peace organization with Israelis and Palestinians working together, where they both lost members of their family and they want to carry on the conversation between Israelis and Palestinians. So we met 2 mayors who lost their children, one in Israel and one in Palestine. We had a discussion with them for an hour, and then we took another hour to debrief. The conversation and to allow the students to better think about the subject, to ask more questions, to talk about what they feel and what they think. And after this activity, after 3 classes, 3 times 3 hours, so 9 hours of class time, we had both groups that were very happy and some discomfort, of course. There were some things that were uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable with certain parts of the discussion for this or that reason. I was emotionally shaken for this or that reason. But these discussions happened. And we all came out of it generally in a good mood, even though there were some tensions. So it was very interesting. And I will close by showing you that there are other tools that we worked with. Nicole talked about the appropriation of culture in the arts. It's a guide that is accessible to try to do things the same way. Why is this sensitive? Why do I need to better understand the themes and the subjects that affect my values, or that touch on my values and that touch on social representation, and in an intersectional way? So you have these tools about the toolkit about genocide that is a toolkit that will be very interesting for history teachers at CEGEP. We built it for Sec 5 especially, but there are presentations that in there that are organized by levels of complexity, with different levels of complexity and definitions, and help us to better understand, and also the different elements that could be difficult to understand in terms of values, social representation, and leaving room for diversity in the classroom. And there was also the guide that Nicole was talking about, but I didn't include it here, but you can find it on the website here. So all these tools are available. You can go and find them on internet. On the internet, there are different guides concerning different regions of Quebec, and different pedagogical guides and theoretical texts that help us to better understand. So all these tools, and I shared all the links to these tools. And so it's always the same process to start with the idea that we have to deconstruct the complexity. We have to identify the values and the social representation, social issues that affect us, and in understanding that there's a diversity of social issues and values that are all legitimate and relevant, and that we understand that there's a certain power dynamic that we understand and must work within these power dynamics in developing empathy on both sides to not make the power dynamics worse. We're trying to understand them and accept them because we are living in a human society where power dynamics are at play always. So I'm going to stop here and take some questions. Thank you, Sivan. There's questions from the participants that I'm going to ask you, and mine if we have time. But there's Emma who's asking, thank you, it was very interesting. It's a subject that is very wide, that has a lot of breadth and very delicate. I think people are looking for the keys to understanding and be more comfortable with these subjects and with the students. And so you are giving them some tools to do so. There's Emma who's asking the following question. In a discussion, for example, on diversity, do you invite us to position ourselves on what we are? I am a woman, a lesbian, my pronouns are, etc., etc. I would say yes. Short answer. But it doesn't mean that every time I have to always say everything about myself. But when it's relevant, I don't always say that I'm Israeli originally. You understand that it's not the easiest thing to talk about right now, but sometimes it's necessary. It's relevant. And so that's what we have to do sometimes. But I also invite you to think about it differently. When we're part of the mainstream, when you're not an immigrant, you don't need to say, I'm not an immigrant. But when you hear a different accent, then the question is, where are you from? How long have you been here? So these are questions that will come up often. So in the same way, when I talk about my stories and share my anecdotes with my students, and if I say I went to the museum with my husband and my children, and I don't think about that. But if I was a lesbian that lives in a single parent situation, maybe 10 years ago, I would have hesitated to say that. Should I say that publicly or not? So we can ask this question. It's legitimate. Is it always the person who's part of a group but that is not as represented? Sometimes you should ask yourself a question. And it's really banal to say, if I'm part of the mainstream, I don't ask that. And I'm just myself and people. So it's good to talk about this diversity if you're from a minority group. So it doesn't have to be a subject in and of itself. It's not because I'm Israeli or not, or lesbian or not, or heterosexual, that's not the subject, but it shouldn't that we focus on, but we shouldn't necessarily always hide it. Thank you. There's Ghislaine, who is asking the following question. Do you think that all subjects brought forward in the classroom tend to become sensitive when we get to a situation of hypersensitivity because of the different dimensions that could be sensitive to different people? Well, I think that it's true that we are talking about the sensitive subjects in the classroom more and more, but it's not because of hypersensitivity. It's because we are talking more openly about things that were not as open before. So things that we didn't talk about 20 years ago, not openly anyway. So I think that that's why I was talking about critical thinking. We want to develop in our students this idea of critical thinking so that they say, "Oh, you have crossed the line. You're not respecting certain limits and certain points of view." And it hurts us, it affects us because we're sensitive and become sensitive to a lot of things. So we give them the chance to talk about a lot of things, but we're not as comfortable with certain things they talk about. So the students, I mean. So we have to be happy to share that, but it doesn't mean that we should stop talking about certain things, but more how we talk about them. So if we stop talking about certain subjects and we take those and push them to the side, then we push them out of the classroom. Well, we haven't served them or ourselves. It's not good for anybody because at the end of the day, they haven't learned anything. So I think that that's something to think about. So this comment I want to share, there's Marie Aboumrad who say, I want to salute the fact that there are 60 people here online in the middle of the March break, and it shows how important this subject is. Thank you. So I will continue my questions. Stephanie, okay. Emma, I will not answer your second question because she already answered it about avoiding certain subjects. Well, unless you have something to add, Sivan. Well, in thinking about the process that I use, is it up to me to bring up this subject? Maybe not. Maybe it's not my thing. Maybe somebody else will bring it up. But if it's up to me to bring it up, is to get the students and myself to think about how we bring up and talk about certain subjects. I don't think we have to avoid sensitive subjects, and I'm totally opposed to Madame Derry, who says not to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at all in the classroom, because the question is, how do we talk about it, and what is the intention pedagogically, and not the fact that we want to avoid these questions completely. Another question is Stephanie, who asks the question, as a woman, hetero, a white, francophone, it seems that it's sometimes difficult to take the position of a teacher on subjects that students know better than me, because I teach literature, and sometimes I have to talk about a social, historical, cultural, socioeconomic context, and I say to my students, I'm not an expert. What can I do better? Well, I think that that's a really good way of looking at it, to recognize that you're not an expert on certain subjects. It takes off the pressure. I take a position of humility. That's what I call it. And I think that's the first thing we should do. It's not because I don't know everything that I can't talk about a certain subject, or that it's not relevant that I talk about it. So what's my entry point? If I talk about this question with you and we look at it, it's not to say, everything that I think, because, for example, in the novel that we're covering, they talk about certain subjects, and I don't necessarily know about all of them. But a colleague of mine that was teaching in Cégep and who taught at high school in Sec 4 after that, and who decided to teach the students the Mice and Men, and he's very worried because it talks about mental health, it talks about racism, it talks a lot about sensitive subjects and very sensitive words for the students. I have different kinds of students from different countries in my classroom, different origins, people who are born in Quebec, black students, Latinos, Asians, all kinds of immigrants. So first of all, he said he wanted to teach of mice and men, and then he started to panic a little bit, and he says to his students, I will share with you a book that is difficult, that covers sensitive subjects, but I think it's worth reading. So if you want to read it, good. If you're not comfortable with it, I will give you something else. And there's no student who asked for another option. They all wanted to explore these sensitive subjects. And it's a very interesting book, yes. And there's Emi, who talks about this very interesting question. During an activity by the Association of Scientific Communicators on taboo subjects, two angles were presented on sensitive subjects, arts and science. I would have liked to have your opinion on that, on the scientific angle. Do you think it's an angle that is pretty neutral, or is science subject to interpretation, in your opinion? I don't know what Emmy is teaching in regards to science, but she says the question came to me at the beginning of the presentation when somebody mentioned evolution as a sensitive subject and the theory of evolution. It's a sensitive subject as well. And I'm questioning that in a question of teaching human anatomy, for example. Well, I think that in general, science is not neutral at all. I don't believe in neutrality is possible, really. So, in the sense that we are who we are. So we can act with more objectivity and be more impartial, but we're never neutral. And we come with a certain baggage. And so the people listen to us understand that. Even if I'm not sharing everything about myself, you see a woman, you hear my accent. We all have an accent, but you think that certain accents tend to come from certain places, which brings up certain preconceived ideas. So there's no neutrality. And my colleagues in science also, I think, understand that there's no such thing. But certain subjects can be handled in a more strict way if you use science. For example, on vaccines. Are vaccines causing autism? We say no. We know that it's no. There's research. The research that said the contrary was pulled from the scientific review where it was presented in saying that it was spurious and wrong. And so this argument of vaccines may cause autism, the answer is clear. It's a no. However, when we think about COVID vaccines, there's no obvious answer from science. So it's not always useful. I work with a lot of colleagues in sciences that talk more about controversial subjects, controversial issues, social issues of a technical nature, of a scientific nature that are controversial. So there's a lot of things in sciences that we were confronted with that we think that it's an absolute truth where it's not the case. And we have to learn to question and think about with the information in science that we look at. But it's a wide question. It's a question with a lot of breadth. Oh, Sivan, we could have continued for hours and hours. Very interesting and enriching, but we have to end it here, and I hope to have more discussions with you in the future. It was very interesting, very instructive, and I would like to thank all our participants today, all the questions that were asked and comments shared in the chat will be shared with everybody, including yourself, Sivan. So a big thank you, and we will see you soon. It was wonderful. Thank you.